Shalom Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. We have today with us author and historian Christopher Bjerknes with us, and it is a pleasure, and we really appreciate you, Christopher, coming on board with us. You've written, 19 books?
19 books, at least. 2 of them are out of print, and I may have lost track of a couple along the way, but at least 19.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I know we have 2 of them here because Yana has ordered them, and I don't remember if she started reading them as of yet. Racial Zionism. I'm going to talk about this anyway because I've listened to some of your interviews and I'm really interested about that. And then, of course, we have another one called Warning to the Jews, Premonition of the Holocaust. So you guys, you can also check out Christopher's website. I'll have the link in there for you as well. But his website here, cjbooks.com. No, CJ, that's right, cjbbooks.com. So that's the website. And check out that. You can see the different works that Christopher has written there. And I'm sure it'll be a blessing to many of you out there. Christopher, I know there's some questions that I have here for you, and at the same time, a lot of other things I guess we'll just kind of do off the cuff. So, but I'm going to start with the ones that I know that I think Yana sent these to you as well. There are conflicting stories about the coronavirus, and that's one of our main reasons we were doing the interview today is because of the coronavirus. And yesterday, Fullerton reported that the coronavirus is a hoax, and rather this event of lockdown will be used for a global rollout of 5G. It will be rolling out everywhere: schools, stadiums, parks, restaurants, hotels, and they will be remotely trying out if it works. Do you agree with the report of Mr. Fullerton?
You cut out for a minute there, but as you said, she sent me the question, and my recollection is that he was alleging that the virus is a hoax, and I certainly don't agree with that assertion. I think the virus is quite real. I think it is mutating. It is becoming increasingly virulent. There are now several strains spread across the earth, and I think the governments of the earth are allowing that to occur on purpose. In terms of the 5G, I think he's onto something there, that they will take advantage of this crisis to put 5G in place, and they will use as a pretext that kids have to be homeschooled and the other things that he alluded to.
You know, speaking about being real, I can certainly concur with that. The one of my sources from the Middle East there shared with me when the Iranians first got it in the Combs community. He had contacts there with some of the scientists that were working on the virus itself, and he got back with me and told me that the way the virus was mutating is it was getting stronger rather than weaker. So he said it was not a natural strain of a common virus that would reoccur, but rather a bio type of weapon being used. And of course, this is something the Iranians believe themselves, is that this has been a weapon used against them in order to further crash the Iranian government to keep them from, well, being a thorn in the side of the New World Order, is my opinion on that. What's your thoughts?
Bioweapon, and I think they probably manufactured several strains ahead of time to attack certain genetic proclivities in various ethnic groups around the world. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Iranians have been hit very hard and very deliberately, as well as the Italians. It looks like the Germans are going to come under increasing attack, and I think also it was deliberately targeted with a specific strain for the Chinese. Now, America is a melting pot, so it is likely that they will target America with the greatest multiplicity of strains in order to do maximum damage to our people.
You know, according to the, I think it's USA Marid, maybe I have the name wrong on that. I did a report on this last night. The U.S. in our own bioweapons lab have 5 different strains. And of course, this COVID-19 comes from the COVID-2. SARS-CoV-2 virus is what this actually comes from. So like you said, there's already multiple strains of this virus out there, so it seems to be more probable that it is being used as a biological sort of weapon, regardless of who actually started it. Nonetheless, it is being used to target certain ethnic groups, and which is kind of interesting. I didn't mention this to you before, Christopher, but I was told a little while back from an Israeli intelligence individual that in the United States they would actually, in the near future, target this nation on an ethnic scale of ethnic cleansing. I don't know if this virus could actually achieve that, but it just kind of makes you wonder.
Well, it makes me wonder if this is simply phase one, and that they are going to, after they've terribly weakened us, roll out several other types of diseases and other types of plagues to attack us with. They can attack our food supply. Our food supply is very vulnerable because of genetically modified organisms. We only have a limited number of plant strains now, and the soils have all been impacted by that. And if some plague comes along that attacks those specific biological strains of plant life, our food supply will be wiped out. We're highly vulnerable on several fronts, and I am fearful and concerned that this is simply phase one of a much worse situation that they're going to unfold on us.
I believe you on that. There's no doubt about that. You mentioned that the several others, and I just recently got a report. I haven't shared with my own audience where it's actually from, and I'll just kind of keep that anonymous. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but I know that there's more than a dozen other scenarios, subliminal research projects that are being disguised as targeted disarming or reduced resistance warfare that is planned. And of course, that was attached with the coronavirus. I don't know if the coronavirus was considered the first one or if it was second or third or anything like that. But that just seems to confirm what you're saying there, Christopher, as well on this. Christopher, when you were with Adam Green,
And in a certain sense, when you say targeted disarmament, that means keeping the civil populace under control. And the coronavirus is going to do a terrific job of doing that on its own, because people are going to be terrified of meeting in public gatherings or making public protests. And with the censorship that goes on the internet, there's going to be no means for people to communicate with one another or to organize on the internet or express themselves on the internet. So that is also a form of lockdown, very similar to...
It is a form of lockdown, definitely so. It cut you out right when you said a form of lockdown.
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
That there's a certain parallel between the idea of disarming people so that they cannot create civil unrest or resist any government actions, and the fact that the coronavirus will inhibit people from gathering and protesting government action or corporate action. And they are also censoring on the internet so that the public has no outlet of organizing any type of resistance or dissent or opposition, or even proposing solutions in a positive as opposed to a negative sense to the government. And they are restricting our constitutional rights through the spread of this virus in a very similar manner to targeted disarmament.
That brings to my mind as well, Christopher, as far as the 7 Noahide laws, and when we look at the 7 Noahide laws, when we're looking at the 7 Noahide laws, to me, they must be closer to being ready to roll out this New World Order that is going to have its headquarters in Jerusalem eventually. And because there's been so many people out there exposing what this New World Order agenda that is being ran by some of the radical elite rabbis, and of course backed by very, I would have to call them elite evangelical preachers, television evangelists, that have really just betrayed their own. This would
Absolutely.
stop that protestability, like you said.
Yes, and also their control of the evangelical preachers, not just evangelicals, but the whole Christian church now is flying rainbow flags, which is symbolic of the Noahide laws. And they are setting up Christians to submit either to the Noahide laws or face decapitation.
That's amazing. We were wanting ourselves to actually protest the signing of the Noahide laws that are being done in D.C. Even this year, we had talked about doing. Of course, it's a little bit late to even try to do something like that. But with this type of virus, there's just and the lockdown, there would be no way to do it. Yana, we did a broadcast over on Patreon just recently, and on that broadcast there, we took the video from 2016 where the Orthodox community were meeting with several different representatives around the world at the UN body. And of course, the one American delegate there, he was challenging the beliefs of this Noahide movement, but yet at the same time, somewhat bowing to it. But it let us know just how much further along they are 4 years ago in 2016, and this is before President Trump was sworn in, and that he was already on board. They had Congress on board. We see Putin, the things that he's doing. We see it's really a global movement, and this may be the reason why, Christopher, we're seeing one event after another that's going to come. Your thoughts?
I agree entirely, and I think it's highly dangerous and should be very alarming to people that Christians are going to be targeted by this, and there's no, well, just on a fundamental level, it's a complete violation of the separation in church clause of the First Amendment. And in addition to that, it shows the power that the people behind the Noahide movement have in the major governments, the United States, Russia, and Israel. They have complete control over those three governments because there's not a voice protesting this religion, which is considered idol worship. Those people are in terrible jeopardy of becoming decapitated.
It is, and it's a real issue. I know that there's a lot of gatekeepers, if you were, like Michael Brown and many others that are trying to downplay these Noahide laws. And quite frankly, several years back, not knowing what the agenda was, but I was approached to help further the Zionist agenda. And I was a Zionist at the time. I probably didn't consider myself a Zionist, but at the time, I definitely, looking back, that's exactly what I was, because I thought that Israel could do no wrong. Even though I began to see things in my own life, living in Israel, having friends in the IDF and hearing the stories about what was done to Palestinians, literally using them for target practice, and it appalled me because I couldn't believe. I mean, how could you do that? How could a human being kill another human being, regardless if I differed with Palestinian ideology? I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. So, and
that's one of the real dangers of the Noahide laws, is it's so difficult for people to wrap their brains around the concept that they would start actually beheading Christians en masse. But we have to look at what happened when the communists took over in Russia and destroyed the Russian Empire and mass murdered 30 million people by 1923 in a simple 6-year period. And then if we look at the fact that our society is under so much stress now from coronavirus, stock market collapsing, housing prices are going to start to fall dramatically, pensioners are going to be ruined, it would be very easy for them to implement these things.
And the people will go along with it.
Ever since the Talmud was written, or from 250 to 500 in Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin of the Babylonian Talmud, in folios 56 to 60, they specify the Noahide laws, and they say that the punishment to Christians will be decapitation.
And you know, the thing is, I continue to try to reading it directly from their sources, because we have the Talmud, we have the Zohar, we have the Midrash, all their books. I have everything. And so rather than somebody say, oh, you got it off of online and the translation is bad, no, I let people know exactly that that's what it actually says, so that people can see for themselves. Christopher, when you were on with Adam Green, you mentioned a few sources that was a pre-planned event, and it is a bioweapon Can you share these with us and these sources? Now, I think you actually sent those sources to us, if I'm not mistaken, um,
The
about
more
this.
recent source, which is well known, is Dean Kuntz's book, The Eyes of Darkness, where in the second edition he stated that there would be the virus released through the Wuhan Biological Weapons Development Labs in Wuhan, and that's it. Looks like what happened here. But I have a much older source from 1910 from a famous communist author named Jack London who wrote The Call of the Wild. He published a short story in 1910 which really was breakthrough work on biological warfare. He was among the first to ever advocate biological warfare, and he advocated it against the Chinese, and he said that it would be developed in New York by a famous scientist in the United States, and then they would release it and several other biological weapons on the Chinese at the same time that the Western powers surrounded China and quarantined it so that the viruses and bacteria would spread and completely exterminate the Chinese. And he
Friends, what happens is Skype constantly cuts out what we're trying to do here, so just be patient with us there. Yeah, cut out, but I'm letting the people know that this is what's happening there. Now, you mentioned when you're talking about this book from, what did you say, 1910, Christopher, is that right?
1910, it was a short story published in McClure's magazine.
You know, that reminds me as well. Even the creation of the State of Israel was published, gosh, I forget what year it was, but it goes back in a very old writing, and they knew that the year would be 1948 that they would actually create the State of Israel as well. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, I quote Rabbi Krull, a Hungarian rabbi who was responding to a Christian minister about the idea that the Messiah had already arrived, and he said that the Messiah would arrive in 1948 based upon the spelling of Adam's name. And in Hebrew, it is composed of ADM, as in Adam, David, Mashiach. So he calculated the period from
I didn't get the calculation yet, but it cut out when you talked about the calculation. But let me see if I can guess it myself. I know that if you look at a biblical timeline, Adam was actually the one. I'm sorry. Well, let's go back to the timeline, and then I'll tell you one about Abraham. And I think this is one of the reasons why they did this as well.
Well, he calculated and published in 1812 in a book that ADM is Adam, David, Mashiach, and the period from Adam to David was half of the period from Adam to Mashiach. So by calculating the period from Adam to David, he doubled it and came up with the year 5708, which was 1948.
That's interesting. I kind of wondered, I speculated myself if maybe if they were looking at the fact that according to the biblical narrative, they had Abraham being born in 1948 from the time of Adam, and so I always wondered if maybe that had anything to do with it. But that was just.
But there's also another passage in Leviticus, I think chapter 25, ye shall return is misspelled in the Hebrew, and it is missing a vav, which is the number 6. And that signifies the idea that they would return less 6 million, and it also, the gematria of the spelling as misspelled added up to 708, so they calculated that the millennium would be 5,000 as approaching the Sabbath millennium of 6,000, and therefore Israel would be founded in the year 1948, and that the Jews would ingather minus 6 million.
And every bit of this, for those of you listening, every bit of this, you have to understand, it's not a divine providence that Israel became a nation in 1948. All right? And I used to think it was, but it's not. Everything has been plotted, planned, prepared, and they're following it to the letter. And right down to their coming of the Messiah. Now, we may not know the exact dates that they got figured out for that as well, but I guarantee you there's some mathematical formula, some gematria that they have put together, they're using to bring all this out. And it's just it's junk. I hate to say it. And the sad thing is too, when you talk about the Holocaust, one of the best books I ever read was called The Holocaust Victims Accused, and that's the Jews telling you how the Zionist Jews turned on them and sent them to their own deaths and everything. It's a sickening book, willing to kill their own. And by the way, Christopher, I did a broadcast one day about this very book right here, exposing the crimes that were done by Zionists and by the Jewish Congress against their own people, especially the Hungarian Jews. And I got an immediate response from Israel saying, you need to stop speaking about this. This froze up just for a moment. But they told me, Christopher, they said, you need to stop speaking about this. We know it's true, but it's water under the bridge. And they even admitted, the one man that wrote me, he said he even admitted that his family was the one that had financed the Stern gang to do all the crimes against the Palestinians.
Well, you're referring to Kastner, who set up a deal with Eichmann to help them deceive some 400 to 800,000 Hungarian Jews that they were being led into relocation and not being led into concentration camps. In exchange, the Nazis who agreed to this got gold, treasure, and other things, and Kastner got to handpick about 1,700 Zionist Jews for deportation to Israel to help with the Zionist project.
That's exactly right.
And there was a Supreme Court trial about it, and there was a book written called Perfidy, which exposed it. And I believe Kastner was assassinated, was he not?
Yes, I believe he was. And, you know, as Dov Weizmann that he had negotiated already, I think, with Himmler to purchase those Hungarian Jews when it wasn't the 1,600, the elite that he got to handpick, for I think it was $4 a person. And some people say, well, no, he would have never done it. But he actually stopped the deportations for more than he agreed to stop for 2 weeks if he'd get a $500 deposit. He did. He did stop the deportations. It actually went longer than that, trying to wait for the Jewish Zionists from Switzerland to actually give Dov Weizmann the money to pay them off. But instead, they sell them out, and they paid $1,000 a head for the 1,600 instead, which came very close to the amount that would have been needed to get all of them. But no, they would rather, as it was said in the trial, they needed to have blood as well at the table for the repartitioning of the lands.
Yeah, it's terrible. And I think Weizmann was also calling for them to bomb all the rail lines in the concentration camps to stop the process, and they wouldn't do it. And there was another man, Joel Brand, who tried to cut a deal with Eichmann where 1 million Jews would be released if the Allies provided 10,000 trucks as an exchange. And that deal was rejected.
Yes, that's in the transfer agreement, if I'm not mistaken, written. Or is that in Perfidy as well?
I think there's a separate book. I don't believe it's a major issue in either Perfidy or the transfer agreement. But it was revealed by Eichmann himself when he was interviewed by Look and Life magazine.
That may actually be in the Holocaust Victims Accused, because I remember reading that very account as well. But I don't remember which one it was, because I've read the 3 of them, but I forget which one. That actually, I wasn't going to go in that direction yet. But while we're here, can you talk a little bit about how that Hitler was actually a Zionist?
Hitler was a communist in the Bavarian Soviet Republic. He served under Kurt Eisner, Ernst Toller, and Eugen Leviné. He was a soldier's liaison for the Communist Party to the soldier councils, the Communist Soldier Councils. He marched in the funeral parade for Kurt Eisner. He was a dedicated communist, and he got caught serving as the bodyguard for Eugen Leviné. And he was recruited by Karl Mayer of the Reichswehr intelligence branch to start spreading anti-Bolshevik and anti-Semitic propaganda. And it turns out that Karl Mayer was a staunch socialist himself and wanted to create a controlled opposition that would become an anti-Semitic Zionist form of communism. because they were terribly concerned that in the Soviet Union, Jews were beginning to assimilate through the process of red assimilation, where they finally had gained power in society and could commingle with Gentiles. So they wanted to end that process, and they wanted to force Jewry into Palestine, because after World War I and the Balfour Declaration, the majority of Jewry did not want to migrate to Palestine. They were quite comfortable living in Europe and in America. So they had to create some kind of motive force to force them out, and they created Hitler as their puppet to do that. And Erich Ludendorff said that he wanted to create a German Joan of Arc, and that Hitler would become his German Joan of Arc, and then he ordered Hitler to take over the German Workers' Party and make it the Communist, Zionist, National Socialist German Workers' Party.
My goodness. That's amazing.
And the whole transfer agreement is fulfills to the letter the blueprint that Theodor Herzl concocted in 1895 and published in 1896 in his book, The Jewish State, an attempt at a final solution of the Jewish problem.
You know, guys, listen, when you hear these things, I know it may be a shock to many of you to hear these things the way you're hearing them, but the problem is there's very few people in the world that are willing to actually take the time and tell you what's really going on. And as I often say, if you really care about the Jewish people, tell them the truth. In fact,
false Jewish messiahs have caused the Jewish people terrible harm from Bar Kokhba on.
yes.
Shabbatai Tzvi also caused terrible harm, and I think that it's the Shabbatai Tzvi branch of Judaism, or crypto-Judaism, which...
The Shabbatai Tzvi, this is where we get the Frankist Jews, is that correct?
Yes, and they believe, just as in the Old Testament, the Messiah is to be of the Davidic bloodline, they believe that Shabbatai Tzvi's dynasty is passed along by the transmigration of souls. There has always been Jewish lore that souls can transmigrate and be reincarnated, and they have rituals whereby they believe that they transmigrate the soul of Shabbatai Tzvi into various other personages, including Jacob Frank, Baruch Yah Russo, and several others.
I know that he had claimed to be that reincarnation of one of the biblical figures, which brings me to a question for you as well. Have you heard before, Christopher, that we'll wait for it to clear up here. I'll ask the question again. Have you heard before that there is a belief that the Saudi royal family is actually a lineage of the Frankist dynasty? Have you heard that before?
I've heard that the House of Saud is a crypto-Jewish lineage that was put into power. I have not heard that they were derived from the Frankists, though.
Okay.
But there was a book actually written about it, and maybe that's a part of that book. I haven't read the book.
Okay, all right. I'd heard that and I didn't know, so I wanted to get your take on that if you were aware of that. But it's interesting to see, though, that the crypto Jews, and that's probably one of the reasons why there is such a push at this point of having the Saudis get control of the Temple Mount so that they can move their next step. Some people believe it's going to be the third temple built on the Temple Mount. Some are saying that it's already built underground. I don't really know the answer to that, but...
I've also heard that there's a theory that they may have prefabricated major elements of the temple and that they will be able to erect it extremely quickly before anyone can react.
I actually, when I used to live in Israel, there was a friend of mine that showed me pictures of the prefabs that were lowered down into, I forget where it was at, but they were lifting up the prefabrications of the walls of the temple, and I didn't know if I wanted to believe it or if it was just propaganda being shown to me, or he had gotten it from some other place. But I mean, he lives there, so I don't know. He was a Palestinian guy as well, so I'm just not really sure. But it would be interesting to see how that plays out. Let me ask you this as well, Christopher. Do you think that the normal life will be back again, or the life as we knew it will be gone in regards to this coronavirus, that this pandemic? And I don't want to make light of the pandemic idea of the aspect of this. It is a pandemic. And the people are dying from this. I actually have seen some of the videos from Iran, because my source in Iran said that Iran was not afraid to show the world what had been done to them. And I saw children in the most agonizing way of dying. And of course, I don't know if they were dying at that point or not, but it was really horrendous. It does attack the respiratory system like you could never believe. But anyway, do you think that we might go back to normal? And I guess we've kind of answered that already, but just direct question on that one.
This is guesswork, but I think this was a world-changing event, and in about 2 to 6 weeks, America is going to crumble in ways that we cannot foresee at this moment. We're about to enter a very tragic period in our history, and it will change us forever.
I can understand that being a very real possibility, because most people kind of see the handwriting on the wall. The economy just can't survive. And I think, too, Christopher, this is part of the plan. I think it was Trump signed an executive order, or maybe, I don't know if it's an executive order, but where he'd already signed the North American Free Trade or something like that, but basically making us part of Canada, Mexico, and the United States all becoming one, and allegedly ending up with a new monetary system that the three share, kind of like the European Union does.
I suspect that's in the works as well. I suspect it will be more than that. I think they're going to try to establish some kind of international currency centered out of Jerusalem. And I suspect they may well collapse the central banks and try to pull all the gold out of the central banks, and they will use the debts that America has accrued and will continue to accrue in an escalating curve as the coronavirus spreads as a pretext to get our gold reserves either in payment or as security for those debts.
I've not heard that before, but that does sound very plausible. So let me ask you this then, Christopher. Are you aware that the Jewish rabbis are spreading the information that the coronavirus is punishment on Gentiles, specifically in China, Iran, Italy, and they specifically mention Christians being punished by the Jewish God? What do you think about that?
I'm not surprised. I expected it. I saw the article in Breaking Israel News, which referenced rabbis Mendel Kessen, Metiyahu Glazerson, and Yosef Mizrahi. I have been noting the fact that the primary enemies and traditional enemies have been targeted as the hubs of these whirlwinds. Italy signifies Rome, which of course
All right, got a little pause. We got to the part about opposed Rome.
Yes, there was opposition to Rome, of course, because of the historical attack of the Romans on Jerusalem under the crypto-Jew Alexander Julius Tiberius Julius Alexander, I'm sorry. And he led the attack on Rome. We know that Greece has been a historic enemy due to the fights with the Maccabees when they believed that they were being Hellenized. And Greece is the hub of the invasion into Europe of Muslim populations from Africa and Asia. China has been a primary target of the Trump administration. So we see that these historic enemies, and now Germany, it was reported that a plane flew from Israel to Germany, and of the 24 passengers that were tested, 7 tested positive.
They flew the plane from Israel to Germany. 7 of those tested positive.
7 out of 24, which is about 29%, which is incredible.
You know, this is almost like it's intentional.
I can't say that, but it's definitely noteworthy. And Angela Merkel said that 70% of Germans would contract the virus, and Donald Trump was trying to buy exclusive rights to a vaccine being developed in Germany, which would exclude the Germans from having access to the very vaccine that they themselves developed. So it seems that these historic enemies are being directly targeted, but it's certainly has spread beyond their borders. So it may be some kind of Kabbalistic ritual, and it's certainly also targeting the primary centers, historic centers of Christendom. Yeah, Greece was the Byzantine Empire, which was engaged in the persecution of Jewry, and Rome was the center of Roman Catholicism, which also controlled the Byzantine Empire effectively. But those two centers of the Eastern and Western Church have been directly attacked, and now we have rabbis saying that it was divine punishment. But these are clearly man-made, manufactured bioweapons.
Well, when they try to say this divine punishment on, say, for example, on the Romans because they consider them to be Edom, I would have to challenge that myself, even coming from a Jewish background. Both my parents were Jews to start with, because no time has Israel ever been displaced from their homeland, if you want to call it this. No time have they ever been displaced from their homeland, except for when their own sins put them into that predicament. So 70 AD was, if you want to look at a judgment, that was the judgment. So, to sit there and say that they're being judged for all this is, to me, is kind of ridiculous. But nonetheless, it is what it is.
And it's completely contrary to Christian theology.
Exactly. But the bad thing is, though, Christopher, is you've got so many Christians that are just falling hook, line, and sinker for anything and everything that these rabbis say. And of course, you've got this Messianic movement. And I don't say that all Messianics are in the same boat on this, but you've got people like Shapira. You've got his running buddy. I can't think of his name right off the top of my head. Mark Biltz and many others that are out there promoting that you have to go back underneath these Talmudic rabbis until the Messiah has identified himself. And these are guys that are supposed to be Christians. And I'm like, how can people be so gullible to believe such nonsense? But whatever. To each his own. I do have a question myself. Communists, in an interview you did with Adam Green a little while back, you spoke about how that the communists opposed the Rebbe, and of course, those of you that do not understand this, the Rebbe, that is a dynasty of it's not just a rabbi. A Rebbe is a rabbi that is in the Chabad movement that is considered a very special rabbi through a dynasty of rabbis. And I think, what was it, like 7 or 8, maybe 9? Seven? Okay. And of course, when this was going on back during the, I think it was at the Second World War or First World War, I forget which one.
Second World War.
That's what I was thinking. The communists had actually captured him, but they hated the guy, but the Americans want him. I'd like to know what your thoughts is on this.
The Rebbe, just before the seventh and last Rebbe, Mendel Menachem Schneerson, I think it was Yosef Itzhak Schneerson, who chose Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was being persecuted by the Soviet authorities, and Chabad Lubavitch was being persecuted. But we always have to be suspicious of that persecution because they encouraged it, and they encouraged anti-Semitism as a means of keeping the Jews segregated and close to God. In fact, the founder of Chabad Lubavitch, Shneur Zalman, encouraged Jews to side with the Tsar against the Philo-Semitic Napoleon, because, so he said, Napoleon would emancipate the Jews, free them into society, and allow them to become economically wealthy. But he held that they would then become spiritually estranged from God, and therefore he asked them to side with the anti-Semitic Tsar and oppose Napoleon so that the Jews could remain oppressed and remain segregated. And that thinking carried on all the way through the lineage of the 7 Rebbe.
It definitely has carried on. And you mentioned how this is carried on down through the Rebbe's, and the same thing we saw in World War II. And the reason why we saw the Zionists opposing and not helping Jews being rescued, and why they would silence the stories even for the World Jewish Congress. It was more based in America and had no compassion on their own people. And it's only from my view, is to gain sympathy, world sympathy, things like that. And of course, also the ultimate was to be able to create the state of Israel and to force Jews back to Palestine. And
to gain atonement, as Rabbi Obadiah Yosef said, and as Schneerson said, that this was God's work to punish the Jews and that their souls had been reincarnated from the Jews who had sinned against God, and that they were obtaining atonement so that the nation of Israel could be founded. And it was the Nazis who rescued Schneerson from the Soviets and delivered him into the hands of the Americans. And during the transfer agreement, the Jewish organizations you referenced were opposing any boycotts against Hitler because they had to keep Hitler's economy going and keep Hitler in power so that he could engage in the transfer agreement and fund the Zionists and supply them with German Jewish brains who were the most talented Jews and among the most talented people on earth at the time.
Very true, and of course, practically every product, every car, every heavy equipment were all German made. That was part of the transfer agreement. And then you have, if you go back and you look,
which is why you see so many Mercedes in Germany today. That's
exactly
where it began.
Exactly. And even another interesting thing as well, if you look at all the prime ministers of Israel, whether they were born in Israel, but most of them were not, they all come from the former Soviet Russian Empire. They come actually from Ukraine, is where they come from. And from what I understand, Ukraine was where the social economic or the economic powerhouse of these families were from. So it's kind of interesting that we don't see any prime ministers in Israel that ever come from any other bloc other than Eastern Europe that were all former part of the former Russian Federation. Have you noticed that?
Yes, and they were mostly all Bolsheviks too.
Exactly.
And they were mostly terrorists. Many of them were terrorists. And there was the Stern Gang you mentioned tried to form a fascist alliance with the Nazis in the Ankara document, which is in my book. And they proposed the idea that they would fight for Nazi Germany against England to kick out the British.
Wow.
And
this is insane, all these things. I tell you, it really is crazy. So it cut you off right after you got started there.
they wore uniforms which mirrored the brown shirt uniforms of the Nazis. And Jabotinsky was known as a Zionist fascist, and he also wore those brown shirt uniforms. And the Nazis allowed the Zionists to publish their own newspaper. They encouraged Zionist training camps in Germany right up until 1938. They allowed them to publish their newspaper, fly their flag, run their organizations, and even regular Germans could not do that.
Let me ask you this, Christopher, because the one thing that I always try to get people to understand, regardless of the Zionist elitists that we deal with there, you still have a huge number of Jewish people that, whether they've just been indoctrinated to believe this or they have no clue, they just don't even get it. And I think that even would go to be fair to say even in World War II. Many Jews just ended up dying. I mean, I know they wouldn't like it, but I don't necessarily agree with the numbers that they give because for the simple reason is, what do we get? How do we get this number? Well, we know where it comes from. It's a Talmudic number. But nonetheless, that's the sad part. There's so many Jewish people that just want to live in peace. They don't want all this hoopla craziness, and but they're controlled by this religious sect that is bent on global domination. Your thoughts?
I think the Jewish people are in peril along with everyone else, and I think that those who orchestrated and perpetrated the Holocaust have plans for another one to wipe out 2/3 of Jewry, because they believe that Jews have to be tried in a furnace of affliction.
Furnace of affliction. We'll catch Christopher as soon as he pops back on there. The furnace of affliction. Let's go right there, because I have spoke about this at length recently, encouraging Jewish people, if you're looking at doing Aliyah, do not go to Israel. Of course, I'm sure they'll try to do it in America too, but I definitely would not go to Israel. Continue on with that thought, though.
Well, that's a significant idea, is that they have broken Jewry into 6 million groups, 6 million in America, 6 million in Israel, and 6 million in Russia. And they always had this notion, as Paul discussed, that there is a stem, a root, and that Jewry cannot be defeated because even if you cut off the branches, the diseased branches, as they put it, there will always be the stem to replenish the tree and to have the outgrowth. So they are quite comfortable with the idea of cutting off whole branches. And in World War II, they were cutting off the branch of the assimilated. The European assimilated Jews is the branch that they wanted to sever. And it is very unpredictable which two other branches they intend to cut off in the near future. But I suspect that's in the works. And people ought to be cognizant of it because it's very real.
It is very real. And what you just mentioned there, Rabbi Keeson spoke about this. I believe it was Rabbi Keeson that actually spoke about this in one of his more recent things there, about the secular Jews in America, and that they're not liked because of the fact that they're secular. And I did not know that they were looking that there was the ideology of 6 million American Jews need to die as well, which will be a crime against humanity. But then again, guess who's going to be the perpetrator? Just like it was in the Holocaust. You know, it's sad. It's very sad.
And we have Putin trying to encourage those kinds of things. It is the KGB, FSB, of which he was the director before he became president of Russia in 1999, that is behind many of the neo-Nazi movements. And the KGB has always been behind the neo-Nazi movements. They set up a notorious neo-Nazi movement in Czechoslovakia. Yana may be interested to learn about that. And they were trying to get them to perpetrate assassinations so that they could discredit the West and discredit West Germany and take over West Germany by saying that West Germany was trying to reinstitute Nazism.
So now, if I understand it correct, then there's still the plot and the plan to take out basically 12 million more Jews, 6 million in Russia, 6 million in America, that have not been pruned from the tree by this Zionist elite. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes, and I think people ought to take it highly.
Catch this thought here in just a moment with Christopher here as soon as this. You were saying that people should take this highly
seriously, because look at the cavalier way that they're talking about the deaths and tragedy that are happening in Iran, in Rome, in China. They have no regard for human life, and they have no regard for human life that is not part of the Zionist cabal. All throughout the Holocaust, Greenbaum, who was mentioned in that book you referenced, Holocaust Victims Accused, were saying that the European Jewish life is not worth anything, that all the Jews in the diaspora are not worth one life of a Palestinian Jew. They had complete disregard for Jewish life unless it was Zionist.
My goodness.
Not only disregard, I think open contempt. They wanted to murder those people. They wanted those people to suffer so that they could attain their atonement and then establish the state of Israel.
This is the thing we're trying to get you guys to wake up to really understand. It is a plot and a plan, not only against the Gentile world, but also against the Jewish world by these elite Zionists. They don't care about your life. In many cases, they consider the secular Jews that they've assimilated so much into society that that's a cancer to them, and they just soon they'll be dead as much as a Gentile. So it's very much a tragedy in the making here. Christopher, I think let's see if I make sure I got all the questions answered or asked here. Make sure here. Yes, we already covered all that. Any closing comments?
Please take the coronavirus seriously. Try to isolate yourself from other people as much as possible. If you have breathing masks, utilize breathing masks when you're in public. This whole crisis has prompted people to go out and hoard things at supermarkets and other things and come in close contact in tight lines, slow-moving lines. and there is the possibility that there will be an explosion of this virus in 2 to 6 weeks, and we will be under the same conditions that Italy is in. We are simply a few weeks behind Italy, but that situation is very likely to occur. So please keep yourselves healthy. Don't panic, but do engage in social isolation. This is not a hoax. You are in danger. It is not only affecting the old people, which is the propaganda the US government is putting out. It can cause 30% reduction in lung function in healthy adults who contract the disease. There is a potential for it to do testicular damage and cause infertility,
Yes.
although that has been disputed. So please take this disease seriously. Please keep yourself healthy, not only for your own sake, but for the sake of all others.
Thank you very much. Again, Christopher Bjerkens, and two of the books that we have, Premonitions of the Holocaust, or Warning to the Jews, Premonitions of the Holocaust. I encourage my Jewish friends to check out that book as well. Racial Zionism, and I think we've said enough for you to know about that right there. These are the two that we've ordered recently. My wife, of course, who can read a book practically in a day. I don't think she's going to read one of these in a day, but, you know, it's pretty close. And also Christopher's website where you can see these books, CJB. That's C as in Charlie, J as in JM, B as in boy, and then the word books.com. The link will be in the description below. Definitely check out what's written there and educate yourself. Christopher, thank you so much for being on with us today. We really appreciate and value your insight on these areas of your expertise.
Thank you so very much for having me, and I want to commend you and Yana on your courage and forthrightness, and please keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live.